Okay, well, there's a good question, a good statement, and a question here from Nadia that I thought would be fun to entertain for a minute. And Nadia says, "Hi, I'm glad to hear both of you say that price does matter. I'm a stock advisor and rule breaker member, and stocks seem very expensive lately, and I don't dare buy any of the Rex. I find it quite difficult with my level of knowledge to know what is a decent price or not. Any advice?" And Nadia, I mean, I'm glad you asked that question. Thank you for that. I think it's an important question that deserves attention. And the tricky part about valuation, and I'm sure Matt will agree, is it's just as much art as it is science. With that said, there is some quote unquote science to it, right? I mean, you're plugging some numbers to try to get an idea of what this company may be worth and why the market's willing to pay, whatever it's willing to pay for it. The tough part with valuation is that it's not always apples to apples. There are different ways to value different companies, and I think that's where it can become overwhelming. But we've always viewed it, in my 11 years here as an investor with the Motley Fool, is you're trying to get as many tools in that toolbox as you possibly can. As many tools in that investing toolbox of yours as you possibly can, to be able to look at companies and get a better idea of what they might be worth and whether a valuation makes sense or not. I don't
Yeah,
know,
I mean,
Matt. What is there any?
well, I got to be honest. There have been a few recommendations by stock advisor and rule breakers in the past few months that I've looked at and immediately been like, "Oh, look at that valuation. That's terrible."
Yeah.
And then the stock goes up by 30%.
Right. Yeah.
So the one I mentioned, focus on quality. Quality is the more important thing. Buying a quality business is more important than buying something that's cheap. At the same time, when I say valuation matters, I mean, you want to see some path to profitability.
Yeah.
Like one company I know that we talk about a lot not in this podcast is Fastly. The internet, the computing company.
Yeah.
They're not making a ton of revenue. If you look at like a price to sales, their valuation looks completely ridiculous.
Yep.
But the company is growing like at a crazy rate.
Well, it
So
was.
it's still growing pretty. I mean, they lowered their growth forecast from like 46% to 40%.
I mean,
That's still pretty impressive in my opinion.
They have a big customer that apparently is not going to be giving them as
Well,
much of their money as they used to.
but that said, even if that happens, they're still growing at a 40% annualized rate.
Right.
Which, point being, a growth rate like that can justify a seemingly crazy valuation because it's a good business.
Yeah.
So don't necessarily avoid recommendations because of the valuation. Avoid recommendations that don't fit into your investing style. If something might be a little too risky for what you want,
yeah,
or if you're going to buy this and you're going to be constantly checking your portfolio and not being able to sleep at night, that's another thing. But don't buy something just because you think the valuation's too high. Because I can tell you in my 10 years at the Motley Fool, that every time I've said the valuation on a recommendation is too high, almost every time it just goes through the roof.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm the guy who called Amazon too expensive at $300. So
yeah. Well, I mean, you learn some lessons as you go along, right? I mean, like Amazon, I was, lucky enough to get into that one back in like, I don't know, 2010. I've owned those shares since like 2010 or something. And I mean, even at that time, I mean, people were just saying it was just ungodly expensive and how could you do that? Yada, yada, yada. Well, I mean, now I'm sitting on like some just absurd number of times over my money just because I just bought some shares and left it alone. And Shopify, I think, is another good example of one where, even when I recommended Shopify in one of my services a couple of years ago, and I made a note at the time. I said, listen, I know this valuation may seem a little bit scary, and I'm with you. It is a little bit scary. So what I tend to do when I see a valuation like that, if it's a business that I like, I understand the business, I believe in its future, and I feel like there's an opportunity there. I will buy in just small lots of shares. Like I will not invest all of my money in that business at once. And so what that does, it helps you spread that out a little bit, and perhaps you'll be able to take advantage of some opportunity if the stock price does dip for whatever reason. And if it doesn't dip, well, then at least you have a stake in the business and you've got some of it. You can always add on the way up. That's like, I say it all the time. That's, I think, probably the most valuable investing lesson I've gotten from David Gardner ever, is just get comfortable with adding to your winners, because really that there's a lot to be said for being able to do that. Um, but yeah, it is not easy, and I think as long as you are able to keep a diversified portfolio where you're not pegged to just all growth stocks, have some stability in there. If you have some stability, that'll enable you to take some, small positions in some of these high flyers that may seem expensive. But, as Matt was saying, I mean, we've seen plenty of those stocks that seem expensive just keep on going, and they go typically because they oftentimes are good businesses.